Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 1 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to Route 139 in the north. I think we one day said that was the wrong route, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, Highway 161.
161, right.
I mean, I guess they're kind of more or less in the same place. They intersect.
They're in this place. One runs north-south down from Kirkland Falls or whatever it is.
Yeah, towards the Susanville area.
Towards Susanville, and the other one's right along the edge at the top, east-west.
Yeah. Brought to you by the California Highways webpage and Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at www.cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of 4 admins on GribbleNation.org, typically the one writing about the southwest corner of the United States, or, as of late, Mexico.
This is episode 3.08, I-5, Whatever Happened to I-5W. And before we proceed into the episode, I want to apologize for this episode coming out late. Tom's been on travel, I've been busy, and we had a whole batch of delays in getting this recorded. And then some of my other hobbies are filling up my weekends, so it's going to take me a little bit longer to get this edited. So it's going to be getting out a little bit late, and there's a good chance that the episode after this may be a little bit late. And that's just how it goes.
So far in California Highways Route by Route, in the first season we laid out the background for our highway discussions, talking about the history of the system, which serves to explain the eras of state highways and what we mean when we talk about stuff like legislative route numbers. The numbering approach to state highways, which explains how the route numbers were chosen and why, the names of the state highways and how they were chosen, the organizations involved in the state highway system. Starting with Season 2, we've been exploring the state highways route by route in post-mile order. Season 2 covered Route 1 and Route 2, and so far in Season 3, we've covered Route 3, Route 4, and segments of I-5 from the Mexican border to the junction with former U.S. Route 99 West, now Route 113 near Woodland. For each route, we've explored the history of the routes, the legislative routes with the numbers, the pre-1964 sign routes, and the post-1964 routes, the history of the various cities, the plans for the freeway routings, the names used for the highway, plans and projects along the highway. If you want to catch up on any past episode, we encourage you to go to our Spotify for Podcasters home at anchor.fm/CA Route by Route, or our forever home at caroutebyroute.org, and listen to the back episodes. We also encourage you to like, favorite, bookmark, and share our podcast with your friends. It really helps kind of get the message out there that we are here.
In this episode, we're going to take a slight digression and look at the original plan for I-5, which had 2 portions. Mainline I-5 between Sacramento and Los Angeles, and I-5W, which was a spur of I-5 that ran through Oakland and the Bay Area. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on what would have been I-5W and what I-5W is today. Some of what we traditionally cover will be skipped, as it's more appropriate to cover things like history, names, and projects with the current highway numbers.
Moving on to the history of Interstate 5 West. When I-5 was defined in 1947, it was defined to run along present-day Route 99 from north of Los Angeles to Sacramento. Another interstate was proposed to provide a corridor to the Bay Area, running along a routing from I-5, then Route 99, that corresponds to present-day Route 132, I-580, I-80, and I-505. Interstate 5 West is notable because one issue of California Highways and Public Works has a picture showing an I-5W shield on the segment of present-day I-580 in the MacArthur Maze. And that picture is widely circulated. I have put it on my own page like 7 times. Prior to 1958, US 99 was connected to Oakland via Route 132, a new terrain route extending Route 132 northwest from its terminus at Route 33 to Almont Pass, and thence west along US Route 50 to the east end of the Bay Bridge. Original number proposed for that route was I-72, but complaints began rolling in from the Bay Area political figures that such a designation didn't place the region on the interstate number, which was north-south. So this is kind of like early on in the interstate system when numbers were very, very important, because we're kind of like it's still in the meat of the U.S. route era. As a result, this connection to Oakland was designated as Interstate 5 West. By 1958, the routing had been modified to start near Tracy. This reflected the move of I-5 off of Route 99 to the westerly alignment and remove the Route 132 segment from Interstate 5 West. There were some proposals that showed Interstate 5 north of the Interstate 5 West split being labeled as Interstate 5 East, at least until it rejoined I-5 south of Dunnigan, but ASHA rejected the notion of I-5 East.
So, we don't have I-5W today. What killed it? And there were three things that led to the elimination of I-5W. First, long multiplexes. There were significant segments of I-5W that would be co-signed with another route, notably US 50 and US 40 or I-80. The only specifically I-5W segments were what is now the I-580 and the I-505 portions. And I always keep forgetting, was I-5W along the triangle of I-580 or did it go along I-205?
It was on the triangle. It's that split that's near, I'm trying to think of the Wesley Rest area. It's the split right north of that.
So the I-205 portion is what used to be US 50. And
Correct.
that triangle portion of I-580 is what would have been I-5W coming up from Route 132. It's sometimes confusing. You sometimes want to think the I-205 portion was part of I-5W, at least when you look at a map. Secondly, they did not like suffix drought. Although they periodically used them, ASHO did not like suffix drought. And today, there are only a couple of examples of suffix droughts remaining. I think, what is it, 35 E and W in Texas? And isn't there like a 94 up in the north?
No, there's not a 94, but there's like a US Route 31 east and west. I want to say like in Kentucky.
Well, I'm thinking interstates.
No, not I-94. There was I-80N, which is now the western I-84.
And then I think they used the suffix for what became I-76 between Denver and up by I-80. And that got renumbered to I-76. But in general, ASHO did not like suffix route numbers. And there were very few of them in California. In fact, I think the only one that lasted for any length of time was I-215E, or I-15E, which became I-215. And then there was the notion of one road, one number. With the 1964 renumbering, Caltrans policy was to have a single integer, no suffix number for each route. Cosigned and suffix routes didn't fit with this. They did have some special cases where it looked like there was another number being used and there was a hidden route number. Most of those have gone away. There are still a few of them. There is, of course, Route 51 in Sacramento, which is the Cap Cities Freeway, Business Route 80. There's, the number just went out of my head, the little tiny route up in San Bernardino, which is basically the long off-ramp from the 215 over to the 210.
259, sometimes it's actually signed.
Oh, it's now been signed. And there were, I think there may be one or two more remaining. But they used to have these little things for like the little stub off of I-8 in San Diego and the little stub of I-15. And they all just basically now became the interstate route numbers.
Yeah, 260, for whatever reason, in Oakland, Alameda is signed as part of Route 61, even though if you're in Alameda, if you kind of approach where you're going to turn to go towards the Posey Tubes, there's a Route 61 end placard, then you go through the Posey Tubes into Oakland, and there's another Route 61 end placard.
So, to get rid of that problem, the problem of the suffixes, they wanted to change the number. Caltrans just did not end up wanting I-5W. I would say there was a significant change in mindset between the 50s when they proposed I-5W and 64 when they got rid of it. So with the 64 renumbering, I-5W went to the great highway number graveyard in the sky to be replaced with I-580, I-80, and I-505.
So look at the primary pieces of what comprise Interstate 5 West, Route 132, the Interstate 580 bypass, US Route 50, Interstate 80, and Interstate 505.
Starting with Route 132. Route 132 was part of I-5W for a short time until I-5 was moved to the westerly alignment, which we talked about in the last episode. In 1934, signed Route 132 was signed along the legislative Route 110 from Junction Sign Route 33, which was legislative Route 41, at Vernalis to Mariposa via Modesto and Coulterville. And in 1957, that was extended to Legislative Route 5, which you remember, because we've talked about it a lot this season, was US 50, and later I-580. But remember, US 50 was along what is now I-205. And the business route 205, in fact, goes through Tracy. So this LRN 110 extension included the Tracy Diagonal, which runs from I-5 on the southern end to the I-580-205 split at one end of Altamont Pass. Now, Route 132 was always intended to be a freeway. Route adoptions took place between 1955 and 1958, and there was even some land acquisition, and the 1958 adoption map shows I-5 labeled as I-5E. Talk about a long period. The actual freeway planning and construction didn't start until 2019, and that construction is still ongoing, and this may be one of the last new freeways built in California.
It's kind of a strange one, too. Right now, it's a Super 2 through the first phase. It's built to 4-lane standards, but like right now, it just dead ends at like a kind of like a random road waiting to connect to the phase 2 part of it.
And as I recall, this one also had, I think, one of the first spuies in California. Am I remember correctly?
I think that's correct.
And a spui, for those who don't know, is a single-point urban interchange where the traffic goes onto the other side of the roadway so you can avoid having left turns.
No. I'm thinking of 120.
It's 120?
It's 120.
Okay. Well, then I remembered wrong. I knew it was one of the two routes there, and 120 is the one that ends up about where 205 is.
Correct. They actually line up. That's one of the favorites of a lot of fictional posters on AA roads of like, why does I have 205 not all the way extend all the way to 99? They're pretty much concurrent.
Yeah, and that's also why you sometimes think that that was where the I-5W was, just because of how they line up.
The diagonal portion of Interstate 580 from I-5 near Vanellis to I-205 is a newish highway added to the state highway system in 1958 as part of Legislative Route 110. Legislative Route number 110 was originally defined in 1935 to run from Legislative Route 41, this was Route 33, to Legislative Route number 4, this was US 99. In 1957, it was extended to Legislative Route 5, which added the segment from the current Route 132 Interstate 580 junction to the Interstate 580 Interstate 205 junction. In 1959, it was extended again with a new start at Legislative Route 75 near Brentwood, sign Route 4, as well as an explicit connection to Legislative Route 238 near Vanellis. The portion from Interstate 580 and Interstate 205 to Route 4 is unsigned Route 239, which might actually be built soon. There's actually some momentum to finally getting this done, or County Route J4 if you prefer, and is represented on some of the proposed mid-state tollway maps and diagrams and everything. The connection to Legislative Route 238 was a piece of Interstate 580 south of Route 132 to Interstate 5.
And this is an interesting segment, and we'll probably talk about the mid-state tollway more when we talk about Route 84, which is sort of where the route number would have been. But there was once plans for a tollway, and was one of the few, I think, public-private partnerships that would have extended from the Tracy Livermore area of I-580 up to the Brentwood area, and might have been very significant for travel in the area, especially now with all the construction.
Yeah, it's one of the few corridors that's new that has a lot of momentum towards getting built, because there's just no way Route 4 through the San Joaquin River Delta is ever going to get built to more than what it is. So really the only way you're going to kind of get like a expressway or freeway connection to Interstate 205 and Route 4 is going to be in the Route 239 planned corridor.
But I would guess it would be an expressway. I can't see them having the traffic to justify a freeway.
I would imagine they actually do have enough traffic to justify the freeway. Byron Highway, which is County Route J4, is very busy. Like at all times, it is an absolutely miserable drive.
Okay, I have not driven it. We'll see whether it gets through with the climate goals that Caltrains has and how those might change due to outside pressure, shall we say. Let's look at the next piece of I-5W. what was US 50. I-5W was intended to be co-signed with US 50 from the junction with I-580. So this is the edge of where 205 and 580 meet, which was that 205 portion, remember, used to be US 50, to where US 50 met US 40 to cross the Bay Bridge near Oakland, and that's all the way up in the Oakland-Berkeley area. I-205, as we've been saying, was never part of I-5W. It was Legislative Route 5 and submitted as I-205 in 1957. Portions of US 50 were co-signed as I-5W briefly in the Piedmont and Oakland area. So this is that area where if you were following State Route 238, it turns into I-580, where I-580 sort of makes a right angle turn and goes across the eastern edge of Oakland along the base of the hills. I hope I'm not confusing it with Route 13.
No, they're both in that same area. This is the MacArthur Freeway. It's got a truck prohibition. That's the whole impetus for I-238 to exist. But yeah, the Warren Freeway is also in that area, which is Route 13.
Yeah. And so the MacArthur Freeway, that segment of it, is what briefly had the I-5W signs. And of course, it's named the MacArthur Freeway because it paralleled MacArthur Boulevard. 1964 saw the removal of the I-5W and US 50 designations and replacement with the I-580 signage. Co-signage with US 50 likely remained until completion of the freeway segments that replaced US 50 all the way to Sacramento. So until they completed, if you recall, we talked about that whole area north of Stockton where they were building through the marshes and they had a whole batch of problems with land subsidence. Until that segment of I-5 got completed and US 50 was still being signed there, they likely kept some of the US 50 signage in place, co-signed with the I-580.
And that's the tricky thing if you're reviewing applications in AASHTO's database. Typically, for segments like US 50, if I recall off the top of my head, the truncation application is actually made mid-year 1963, truncated at Sacramento. But the field signage would remain in place for several years. So, like, one of the common questions I get on my page is, like, well, signage was in place until, like, 1971. Like, well, that's great. But the actual application is, like, all I really got to go on. It's, like, as far as official documents.
And that is one reason why, in terms of what the state defines as the route, you cannot always depend on the signage. You're better off depending on the number that's on the post-mile paddles. Now, between Oakland and slightly north of Vacaville, I-5W would have been co-signed with I-40, which was later I-80, along Legislative Route 7. And I can't remember if I've discussed this or not. I've written the episode on Route 7, so it's all blurring on my head. But if you recall, we had Legislative Route 7 going up from the area by the Carquinez Bridge all the way up into Sacramento as former US 40 and I-80. And we also had a little bit here that would have been, what was the legislative route that was in the Bay Area below 7? I think 7 may have continued a little bit further.
14 originally, which is the original routing mostly of US 40.
Yeah, so you were that a little bit, I would say, along LRN 14 as well.
North of Vacaville, Interstate 5 left Legislative Route 7 to proceed north along Legislative Route 90. Legislative Route 90 was defined in 1935 as LRN 7 near Vacaville to LRN 5 near Dunnigan. This ran from near Vacaville through Winters and Madison. Legislative Route 90 does not appear to have a signed route number prior to 1964. After the 1964 renumbering, it became Interstate 505. The freeway was constructed in sections, beginning at the interchange at Route 16 and Route 128, far in advance of any other part of the freeway. These interchanges, actually two sections of constructed freeway, a 2-mile section at the junction of Route 128 and a 1-mile section at Route 16, were part of the 1957-58 project that relocated the section of then existing Legislative Route 90 about a half-mile east of the original route and followed the Southern Pacific Rumsey branch line that extended north of Vacaville to Madison before turning west along Route 16 to Rumsey. The Cache Creek Valley was noted for hop production, so this is kind of a big ag-centric area up near Sacramento. The relocation extended south of Winters and north of Madison included segments angling back to the original alignment. It was constructed as a two-lane expressway with short four-lane freeway segments through Route 16 and Route 128 interchanges. There was no Interstate 5 West shields erected on that portion of the route. Signage simply indicated Reading for northbound and San Francisco for southbound. The next segment completed was a connection between Route 16 and Route 128, then the segment from I-5 to Route 16, and finally the segment from Route 128 to Interstate 80. The freeway was completed by 1977.
You may be asking, why didn't they just use Route 113, which was former US 99W in that area up near Davis? And the answer is the same reason why they built the Westerly extension. This was interstate mileage. They got 90% of the construction money to build a new freeway. And if you look at the quality of the I-505 freeway versus Route 113, which is still pretty much an expressway, you can see why they did it. I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't one of the reasons why they built the Tracy Diagonal additionally, because they got money for new freeway for that. They also did get some money for new freeway for 205, but I would say for 580, that's really a good reason for not to have just used 205. They got more construction money.
That's the kicker. It's a lot of these routes that a lot of people comment about today should be interstates and everything. Well, the reason they're not, like Route 99 and US 101 between San Francisco and LA, a lot of that stuff was budgeted, allocated, or presently under construction when the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 became a thing. Why take chargeable interstate mileage money for a corridor you're already funding when you can get a brand new one instead?
And that's why a lot of things have never been converted, have never been upgraded. And nowadays, you're not going to be seeing a lot of new interstate freeways simply because that same funding split is not there.
Funny, there was a video that I was watching on YouTube the other day, and that somehow they had 100,000 followers, and the guy that was doing the video had no idea that was no longer a thing. It's like, that was irksome to listen to.
What was he talking about?
He was talking about interstate connections that are logical on paper and should exist, and he was referring to I-11 specifically, how the federal government was going to contribute most of the funding, and it just kind of got a laugh out of me when I heard it.
Was this for the portion down in Arizona or north of Reno?
In Arizona.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever see the I-11 portion pretty much maybe south of Phoenix.
I don't even think it will reach Buckeye. Like, it might get to I-40, that's kind of easy, and you already got the Kingman interchange going on, but there is, this is my opinion, and this is an Arizona side conversation, routing I-11 west of the White Tank Mountains defeats the purpose of creating a Phoenix, Las Vegas interstate route, and Buckeye, the city, annexed a lot of that land a long time ago, and they've been pushing for development out there for over 20 years, and it still hasn't happened. So, just my thought as a former Phoenix resident, I don't see it happening.
Buckeye, and since this is a short episode, having these conversations works, is one of those areas that was notorious before they completed I-10 of having a speed trap along Arizona 85 where, like, every 50 feet the speed limit would change.
Yep, and that was still a thing even when I lived there in the early 2000s. You'd have these random four-lane expressway segments which would just drop suddenly, like to 45 miles per hour because you're approaching a traffic light.
Yeah, it was notorious. I remember going to visit my wife's relatives in Tucson, and we'd run into that as we went through Phoenix. Completing I-10 got rid of a lot of those problems. But I-10 is still really weird through Phoenix with the loop. With 17, it's just not a logical progression there.
No, but there's the whole Dick Park Tunnel controversy and everything. So I-10 functionally followed I-17 to hit US 60 for many, 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 many years. I-10 was supposed to be a viaduct through downtown, and pretty much everybody that lived in Phoenix absolutely hated the idea. And it really never got finished until the Dick Park Tunnel became a thing.
Well, I would imagine a viaduct would be a really bad idea in Phoenix during monsoon season.
Yeah, but I've seen the drawings. It's just plain ugly. Like, even by, 1960s and 70s standards, it's just hideous.
Yeah. In any case, folks, that's I-5W. Nowadays, It's a bunch of other little things, and the history is lost, but people still love to talk about it because it's this odd little historical route.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat one, though. Like, concept when you really think about it of having a branch of I-5 serving the Bay Area is kind of an intriguing one when you really look at how much of a mileage difference that is. It's really not a lot. It's not all that much longer, surprisingly.
It probably, well, I mean, it's constructed. It gets a fair amount of traffic for people going to the Bay Area. And despite Tom's hatred of the boredom of I-5, if you're going to the northern part of the Bay Area from Southern California, it really is the better route. If you're going to San Jose, take 101 or take I-5 and Pacheco Pass. But for the northern part of the Bay Area, you want to do this route. It's going to be so much faster than trying to slug through traffic through San Jose and Milpitas and that area.
Or take 198 or in Route 25 to hit San Jose.
You like your little routes.
Yeah, that's a fast one. That's a 2-lane highway where you can hold that 55 mile per hour limit pretty easily. Both of them. Next
time on California Highways Route by Route, we're going to return to I-5. We're going to be looking at what used to be US 99W, the segment from Woodland, which is where Route 113 meets the westerly bypass, up to near Red Bluff. Up in Red Bluff, you have the two pieces sort of come together of 99E and 99W. That was where you had a little bit of Route 36 in the mix. So we'll cover that segment of I-5 next time. For more information, visit the pages on I-5, US 99, Route 132, I-580, I-80, I-505, legislative routes 5, 7, 90, and 110 over on cahighways.org. Tom has a number of Gribble Nation blogs that covered this area, both from the old US 50 and US 48 areas, because that segment of US 50 actually for a time was US 48, talking about the I-580 segments there, the I-505 segments, a bunch of really interesting blogs in that area. And if I can find any more, I'll put some additional links on the show page.
As always, information on this episode is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on the episode. Spotify has added a comment feature, so you may be able to comment there as well. The episode is available on our Spotify for Podcasters home, https://creators.spotify.com/pod/show/ca-route-by-route. Please remember to like, subscribe, and review our podcast and your podcaster of choice. It helps people find us, and it really, really is effective. I found that with just some shares of my own. Remember, after the credits, we often have a bit of free-form discussion on the subject of this episode. To join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Fear, edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Glover-Kind. If you have an opening theme you think might be good for our show and is either in the public domain or you're willing to let us use for free, contact me at daniel@caroutebyroute.org. Episodes are recorded using freeconferencecall.com, and this podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and Gribble Nation at gribblnation.org. So we've done a lot of discussion during this episode. Is there anything you want to add on I-5W?
Well, just in general about suffix routes. It's kind of a weird thing to me that this is such a taboo thing in general, just with like so many Department of Transportation agencies, AASHTO, the Federal Highway Administration, when it wasn't for a long time. Because you look at like how a lot of other countries do highway numbers and routings, they have suffix routes. Like I was just in Mexico, and a good example of this would be the D routes, the autopistas. They're just suffix route, like basically a freeway bypass of the free surface routing.
Are they suffixed or prefixed?
Suffixed.
I know, for example, Europe, I think, uses prefix routing. The EMA, whatever.
So I always thought that was kind of strange that there's like this thing against it in the U.S. when it's not the practice that's established most places in the world.
I wonder if it's an artifact of technology. And let me explain that. We're talking 1964. your computers back then were your big IBM mainframes, the IBM 709, the 360 was just coming out. I think the 360 was introduced. The IBM 360 was introduced in 64. UCLA got one in 65. And it was probably easier for them to work with highway numbers as they were doing their initial computerization as all numbers as opposed to numbers and suffixes. And I wouldn't be surprised if that artifact then didn't remain throughout the years because of just how they were managing the route numbers.
Quite possibly. I mean, the argument seems to be that it confuses motorists, and I've never really, my interaction with routes that have suffixes, I've never really found that to be true.
I don't think people think of the route numbers as numbers. I think they think of the route numbers as tags, just labels that you attach to a highway. And it could have just been the Jersey Turnpike without a number, and it's the equivalent thing. And this may be why people get so surprised when they discover, oh, there's actually a meaning to the different parts of the numbers, which isn't true if you're talking about, these names on turnpikes.
Yep.
In any case, that's our episode on I-5W. Next time, we will be talking about the penultimate segment of I-5.